spent in a miserable way.
The Supreme Court should adopt an ethics code. The Washington Post. Robert H. Tembeckja is Administrator and Counsel to the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct, and he serves on the American Bar Association Advisory Committee that revised the Model Code of Judicial Conduct in 2007. During the contentious Supreme Court confirmation process for Brett M. Kavanaugh, and soon after he was on October the 6th, dozens of ethics complaints against him were filed. All were on December, allegations that the review panel had deemed that Kavanaugh had testified falsely during his confirmation hearings about his personal conduct and about his activities in the White House under President George W. Bush, and that he had displayed partisan bias and a lack of judicial temperament. He went into ethical limbo. The fate of the Kavanaugh complaints seems to have stirred House Democrats to action. The first bill introduced in the 116th Congress includes, along with provisions for voting rights and campaign finance reform, a measure to require the development of a judicial code of ethics that would apply to all federal judges, including those on the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. is on the record as opposing such a move. In 2000, Rove's statement did deter Rex. Louise M. Slaughter, but there is a way to avoid bickering on Capitol Hill over the legislation and to sidestep the inherent clash between the substantive question posed by House Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler DNY. You should the Supreme
Raindrop, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park, pot.